Our topic for today is matter and energy, specifically how those two things move through ecosystems. Energy, and we're talking starting with energy from the sun, is a one-way flow through an ecosystem. That is, it starts with the sun and goes through the food chains and food webs and then is basically lost as heat. And matter, then, on the other hand, being completely recycled over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? And matter is anything with mass. So even a little tiny oxygen atom has mass, and that would be considered matter. And it can be a solid, liquid, or gas. So matter is just about everything. We'll start with energy, and again, starting with the sun. And this is just how that energy from the sun moves through an ecosystem. So the first most simple way is a food chain, and that is a diagram that just shows how energy is transferred. And that's literally what the arrows are. So if we start with the sun, the energy from the sun gets used by plants to make sugars. Okay, and those sugars are used for food for the herbivores. This arrow represents a transfer of energy. So energy is going from the plant to the animal, from the plant to the herbivore. Okay, well then this herbivore eats the energy and uses some of it, and then the bear here eats that, this purple arrow showing the energy transfer to the bear, and so on all the way through, and even until the decomposers get it, and detritivores and bacteria and mushrooms, and the energy then is completely dissipated at that point. That means that it's used up. No more. Okay? A more complicated version of that food chain is just a food web, and that is in reality how it exists in nature, and that is just a bunch of food chains put together to form a web. So if you look at the food chain, there's arrows going all over the place, and those arrows show the transfer of energy. So energy is going from this grass to this grasshopper, and then to this bird. And that would be literally one food chain. Grass, grasshopper, bird. Another food chain, grass, grasshopper, fox. Another food chain, seeds and nuts, squirrels, fox. So there's a bunch of different food chains combined, interrelated to make a food web. And again, the arrows showing the transfer of energy. And speaking of energy, not all the energy gets transferred, and we have what's called a 10% rule, and that's roughly, it's not exactly 10%, but it's approximate. Organisms use up most of their energy, and then they only store 10% of it, and that is what's available to the organism that eats them. Okay, and we often show that by a pyramid of energy, and basically at the base of the pyramid here are the producers, and that is where most of the energy exists. And then as it goes, and this is listed in calories here, so if there's 1,000 calories of energy available here, only 100 calories are available to the next level, and then to the next level only 10, and then the next level only 1. So at the point of the pyramid gets smaller here because less energy is available to the organisms at the top of the pyramid. Okay? Now, another way to do that is not only with calories, but with kilograms. So if you see all these producers down here, you can actually, like the weight of them, if there is, let's say, 1,000 kilograms of producer, that means there can only be 100 kilograms of primary consumer, and only 10 kilograms of secondary consumer, and only 1 kilogram of tertiary consumer, or that top consumer. So that means for every kilogram of hawk, there has to be 1,000 kilograms of plants in that ecosystem. Because if it's not, otherwise there's not enough energy to sustain those big predators. So what do they use the energy for? Well, they use the energy for growing. That takes a lot of energy to grow like a plant does. Okay? Or, sorry about the volume, but that's funny. Watch his head. It's a cheetah's head. Anyway, it takes energy to chase things down. They have to live, they have to reproduce, they got to eat, they use up a lot of their energy. Okay, and so that's why only 10% of it is available to the next level. Now, pause the video and answer these two questions in your notes, please. Our next topic is cycles of matter, and so the ones we're talking about are the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the nitrogen cycle. Those are the pieces of matter that we're talking about, and basically we're looking to see how those things get into living organisms, and then back into the environment, and then back into living organisms, and back into the environment, because they are completely recycled over and over and over. Okay, just some random numbers about what's in the air, and we'll get to what's in land a little bit later. But 70% of the air is nitrogen, another 20 oxygen. So it's mostly nitrogen and oxygen, and a lot of people are surprised to see that the CO2 levels are a really, really, really small percentage of what's in the atmosphere. Start with the water cycle, and again, that's just those four vocab terms we'll need to be familiar with: what condensation, precipitation, evaporation, and transpiration are. And when we look at the diagram here, we'll kind of show those things in a minute. Here's just some random facts about it. The third one I'd like to talk about a little bit. Water is constantly being recycled, so the water you drink could be the same water dinosaurs drank or peed millions of years ago. There you go. You drink dinosaur pee. That's gross. Okay, here's the diagram of the water cycle. So just take a look at the picture and try to figure out ways that water goes from the land up into the atmosphere and from the atmosphere back into the land. Okay, those are some of those terms that we'll look at. Evaporation is water going from the oceans or lakes up into the atmosphere. Okay, and precipitation is water coming from the atmosphere back down to the ground. Transpiration, or sometimes called evapotranspiration, is that water literally goes up the plants and out of the leaves and up into the atmosphere. So that's another way that it goes into the atmosphere. Sometimes it goes right from a solid to a gas into the atmosphere in something called sublimation. But eventually then it all comes back down to the ground. Some of it will go into the groundwater and be filtered. Sometimes this is also called percolation, and it cleans the water as it goes, and sometimes the groundwater flows back into lakes and rivers and oceans, and sometimes it's stored in the ground in things called aquifers. But this is just a diagram of water into the atmosphere, back down, and so on. Our next cycle is the carbon cycle, and just some places where we might find carbon. It's in the atmosphere and in the oceans is carbon dioxide, and it's in the land, and it's underground in coal and petroleum and those other things. Here's a picture of it, and again, we know that photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide. So a way that carbon dioxide gets out of the atmosphere and into organisms is through photosynthesis. So it comes in through the little stomata of the leaves, and then plants rearrange it to make sugars. But plants also give off CO2 because we know that they also go through cellular respiration. So they do give off some excess CO2 as well. Decomposition gives off CO2. Factories give off CO2. So again, CO2 going to and from the organisms in the environment. And here's just some diagrams of the carbon stored in glucose, carbon stored in carbon dioxide, and then there's also a whole bunch of carbon in coal and oil. Okay, the nitrogen cycle. Again, here's where we find nitrogen in the atmosphere, soil, water. Obviously, it's in the nitrogen bases in DNA. This is a nitrite, this is a nitrate, and this is an ammonium atom, actually. Nitrite, nitrate, and ammonium, sorry. So just some diagrams of what those things actually are. And here is the diagram, and we'll work more with these in class with your coloring sheets, but basically nitrogen is in the atmosphere and it has to get fixed. So there are bacteria that do this, and there are bacteria. Some of them are found in the roots of plants, and they make that atmospheric nitrogen directly available to the plants. Other nitrogen-fixing bacteria are in the soil, and they convert it to ammonium first, and then nitrites, and then nitrates, and the nitrates are the things that get used by the plants, and the plants take it up, and now it's in the living organisms. So it goes from atmosphere with the help of bacteria into plants, and then through other bacteria back into the atmosphere. So bacteria is super important for the nitrogen cycle. Phosphorus cycle, mostly on land, rocks, and minerals, a little bit in the DNA, and then at the bottom of the ocean in some sediment as well. And here's another diagram of the phosphorus cycle. And a lot of it comes from the rocks and water runoff and goes into the waters that way. And again, we'll have diagrams of these in class. But for the nitrates and the phosphorus, a lot of it comes from fertilizers. Plants need these things to grow, and we apply fertilizers to the land, and sometimes then that runs off and gets into the water. Okay, that ought to do it. Now, this is your target again. I can explain how matter and energy flow through an ecosystem, and we'll work on this summary together, but you should have an idea of how to explain that target after watching this. Okay, thanks.